This is where I belong.
I knew you'd come home for Christmas. This is the best Christmas ever.
My husband promised me a perfect Christmas. Instead, he left me alone to play savior to his ex-wife and their teenage daughter. He thought I was sitting at home, weeping into a glass of wine. He was wrong. By midnight, he had lost his family, his fortune, and his future. The scent of pine needles and roasting cinnamon was supposed to be the backdrop of our first truly peaceful Christmas. I had spent 3 days preparing our restored Victorian home in Evanston, meticulously draping garlands over the banisters and ensuring the 12-foot balsam fir in the living room was a masterpiece of gold and silver glass ornaments. I am, or at least I was, a woman who believed in the power of creating a sanctuary. For 3 years, I had been the devoted, understanding second wife to Thomas, a charismatic and successful commercial architect whose past always seemed to cast a long, suffocating shadow over our present. That shadow had a name: Sylvia. Sylvia was Thomas's ex-wife, a woman who treated their divorce not as a legal separation, but as a lifelong subscription to his time, energy, and finances. Together, they shared a 14-year-old daughter, Chloe. I loved Chloe. I really did. But Sylvia wielded that poor girl like a blunt instrument every time Thomas and I tried to build a life of our own. If we booked a romantic anniversary trip to Paris, Chloe mysteriously developed severe separation anxiety that required Thomas to cancel his flight. If I hosted a Thanksgiving dinner for my family, Sylvia would inevitably experience a plumbing disaster that only Thomas could fix, pulling him away right as the turkey was carved. But this Christmas was supposed to be different. Thomas had sworn to me, looking deep into my eyes with that earnest, crinkling gaze I had fallen in love with, that this holiday was ours. Then came the morning of December 24th. I was in the kitchen, carefully prepping the pastry for a beef Wellington, when his phone rang. It was 9 a.m. I saw the caller ID flash on the marble island. Sylvia, mobile. My stomach instantly plummeted. A cold dread washed over me, thick and suffocating. Thomas answered it on the second ring, his voice dropping to that hushed, urgent tone he reserved strictly for her. Sylvia, what's wrong? Slow down. I can't understand you. He paced into the hallway, running a hand through his dark hair, leaving me alone with the silence of the kitchen. I stood there, a flour-dusted rolling pin in my hands, listening to the muffled cadence of his voice. 10 minutes later, he walked back into the room. His face was a mask of calculated exhaustion, the very picture of a burdened father. Clara, he started, letting out a heavy sigh that was meant to solicit my sympathy. It's Chloe. She's having a massive panic attack, a real mental health crisis. Sylvia is completely hysterical and doesn't know what to do. She's threatening to check her into a facility if she can't calm down. Oh my God, I said, wiping my hands on my apron, my maternal instincts briefly overriding my suspicion. Is she okay? Should we go over there? Or bring her here? No, no, Thomas said quickly, holding up a hand. Sylvia won't allow that. You know how territorial she gets when Chloe is vulnerable. And honestly, bringing her to a new environment right now might push her over the edge. I need to go over there, just to calm things down, just to talk her off the ledge. I looked at him, searching his face. Thomas, it's Christmas Eve. My parents are arriving at 4 o'clock. We have a whole dinner planned. You promised me. I know, baby. I know, he pleaded, closing the distance between us and wrapping his arms around my waist. But she's my daughter. If something happens to her because I was too stubborn to go over there, I'd never forgive myself. I'll just go for a few hours. I'll soothe her, get her stabilized, and I'll be back before your parents even unpack their bags. I swear to you. What could I say? If I threw a fit, I was the wicked stepmother prioritizing a holiday dinner over a child's mental health. It was the ultimate trump card. Sylvia knew it, Thomas knew it, and I was trapped by my own decency. Fine, I whispered, stepping out of his embrace. But please, Thomas, don't let her drag this out. Set a boundary. I will, he promised, kissing my forehead. I love you. You're the most understanding wife a man could ask for. He went upstairs to get dressed. When he came back down 20 minutes later, my lingering unease blossomed into full-blown alarm. Thomas wasn't wearing a comfortable sweater or the casual clothes one might throw on to deal with a hysterical, weeping teenager. He was wearing a crisp, freshly ironed Oxford shirt, his tailored navy slacks, and his vintage Rolex, the one I had bought him for our first anniversary. Worse, the air around him was heavy with the rich, spicy scent of his Tom Ford Noir cologne, and in his right hand, he carried a black leather duffel bag. "What is that?" I asked, pointing to the bag, my voice trembling slightly. He didn't miss a beat. "Oh, just a change of clothes and some toiletries. You know Sylvia's house is a madhouse. If Chloe ends up getting sick or if things get messy, I don't want to ruin my good clothes before your parents get here. Just being practical." He was smooth. Too smooth. "You're wearing Tom Ford to deal with a panic attack?" I challenged, crossing my arms. A flash of irritation crossed his eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Clara, I literally just grabbed whatever was on the dresser. Please don't do this right now. My daughter is in crisis. I need your support, not an interrogation." He weaponized my guilt flawlessly. I bit my tongue, stepping back as he put on his wool overcoat. He kissed my cheek, a dry, perfunctory peck, and walked out the front door. I watched his Audi back out of the driveway, its tires crunching the fresh snow, leaving me utterly alone in a house that suddenly felt more like a beautifully decorated tomb. By 4 p.m., the silence in the house was deafening. My parents had called an hour earlier. Their flight from Phoenix had been delayed due to the snowstorm blanketing the Midwest, meaning they wouldn't arrive until much later that night. I was completely alone. I poured myself a generous glass of Cabernet and sat by the roaring fireplace, my phone resting on my lap. Thomas hadn't texted. Every message I sent, "How is she? Is she calming down?" was met with radio silence. I decided to call my best friend, Megan. Megan was a razor-sharp corporate litigator who had never fully trusted Thomas. She answered on the first ring. "He did what?" Megan nearly shouted through the speaker after I explained the situation. "Clara, are you kidding me? A duffel bag and Tom Ford? He's not playing nursemaid, honey. He's playing you." "Chloe is sick, Megan," I argued, though my voice lacked conviction. "Bullshit. Sylvia plays that sick child card like it's an Olympic sport, and Thomas is a willing participant," she snapped. "You are sitting in a massive house waiting for a man who is actively choosing to be with his ex-wife on Christmas Eve. Call his bluff. Go over there. I can't just show up. I'll look like a crazy jealous wife." "Then don't go empty-handed," Megan advised, her tone shifting to tactical mode. "Take a gift. You bought Chloe that charm bracelet, right? Take it over. Play the role of the deeply concerned, loving stepmother. If it's a real crisis, you're there to support. If it's not, well, then you'll know, won't you?" We hung up, and I stared into the fire. Megan was right. I couldn't sit here letting the acid of doubt eat through my stomach. I went to the guest bedroom, retrieved the small, teal Tiffany & Co. box containing the silver charm bracelet I had bought for Chloe, and wrapped it in festive silver paper. I grabbed my keys, threw on my heavy winter coat, and walked out into the freezing Chicago evening. The drive to Oak Park, where Sylvia lived in the 4-bedroom colonial she had won in the divorce, took 45 agonizing minutes through the snow. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, my heart pounding a chaotic rhythm against my ribs. When I finally pulled onto her street, I parked 3 houses down, hidden by the shadows of a large oak tree. I turned off the engine and walked the rest of the way. The snow muffled my footsteps. Thomas's Audi was parked proudly in the driveway, right next to Sylvia's Range Rover. I approached the house cautiously. The expansive bay window in the front living room was completely uncovered, the curtains thrown wide open to showcase a massive, brightly lit Christmas tree. I stepped onto the snow-covered lawn, pressing myself near the bushes, and looked inside. What I saw shattered the reality of my life into a million jagged pieces. There was no crisis. There were no tears. There was no panic attack. The living room was a portrait of a perfect, joyous family Christmas. A fire was roaring in the hearth. Chloe, supposedly on the verge of a psychiatric breakdown, was sitting cross-legged on the floor, laughing hysterically while wearing matching red plaid pajamas. And she wasn't the only one in pajamas. Thomas had changed out of his suit. He was wearing the matching men's set of the red plaid pajamas. Sylvia, looking radiant and decidedly unhysterical, was wearing the matching women's set. They were drinking champagne. They were smiling. But the killing blow came a moment later. I watched, paralyzed by the cold and the shock, as Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, rectangular velvet box. He handed it to Sylvia. Chloe clapped her hands in excitement. Sylvia opened it, feigning a gasp of surprise, and lifted a glittering diamond pendant from the velvet. Thomas stepped behind her, gently brushing her hair aside to clasp the necklace around her neck. When he finished, Sylvia turned around. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and Thomas pulled her flush against his body. They kissed. It wasn't a friendly peck, nor a nostalgic embrace. It was a deep, passionate, possessive kiss of two people who were very much together. I couldn't breathe. The air had been sucked out of my lungs. My knees buckled slightly, but I caught myself against the frozen brick of the house. I had been a placeholder, a babysitter for his house, an intermission in their tragic romance. I didn't storm the door. I didn't scream. A sudden, terrifying calm washed over me, an icy, calculating numbness. I turned around and walked back to my car, the Tiffany box still clutched in my freezing hand. I drove home in absolute silence. My mind was racing, connecting 3 years of dots in a matter of minutes. The secretiveness with his phone, the mysterious business expenses, the delayed deposits into our joint account. When I got back to Evanston, I walked straight into Thomas's home office. I needed proof, and I needed it now. He was meticulous about his main laptop, carrying it with him everywhere. But I knew he kept an older iPad synced to his iCloud in the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk. I ripped the drawer open and pulled it out. The screen lit up, demanding a 4-digit passcode. My fingers hovered over the glass. I tried our anniversary. Incorrect. I tried Chloe's birthday. Incorrect. My heart hammered in my throat. I closed my eyes and typed 0814, August 14th, Sylvia's birthday. The iPad unlocked. I opened his iMessages and found a thread with Sylvia. I scrolled back, my eyes scanning the texts. They weren't just having an affair. They were orchestrating a financial massacre. Sylvia, did she buy the panic attack story? Thomas, hook, line, and sinker. I'm packing my bag now. Can't wait to see you and Chloe. Sylvia, are we still on track for January? I'm tired of sharing you. Thomas, yes. The partnership bonus clears on December 31st. I've already transferred the last $150,000 from the joint equity into Arthur's LLC. Clara doesn't suspect a thing. I'll file the papers on January 2nd. She'll get the house, but the liquid cash is safe with us. I dropped the iPad onto the desk, my hands shaking violently. He wasn't just leaving me. He had been systematically draining our shared assets into a shell company managed by his brother, Arthur, for the last 6 months. He planned to blindside me with divorce papers right after New Year's, leaving me with a heavily mortgaged house and empty bank accounts. I looked at the grandfather clock in the corner of the office. It was 6:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve. He thought I was the naive, submissive wife who would sit around waiting for him. He thought he had until January 2nd. He was wrong. I had until midnight. The grandfather clock in the corner of Thomas's office ticked with a heavy, rhythmic thud. It was exactly 6:32 p.m. on Christmas Eve. The initial wave of suffocating grief had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. I stared at the iPad screen, reading the messages between Thomas and his brother, Arthur, confirming the transfer of our life savings into a shadow company. He was going to serve me with divorce papers in 9 days, leaving me drowning in the mortgage of this massive Victorian house while he playing happy family with Sylvia, funded by my financial ruin. I picked up my phone and called Megan again. I need you to put on your lawyer hat, I said, my voice eerily calm, the moment she answered. Right now. I read the text messages to her word for word. I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Clara, listen to me very carefully, Megan said, her tone instantly shifting from concerned friend to a razor-sharp litigator. What he is doing is called the dissipation of marital assets. It is highly illegal, but if that money fully settles into an offshore or heavily shielded LLC, dragging it back through the courts could take years. Years of legal fees you won't be able to afford. We need to find out exactly where that money is, and we need to intercept it before the banks reopen after the holiday. He mentioned Arthur's LLC, I said, scanning the dark office. But Thomas is meticulous. He wouldn't just hand over $250,000 without keeping a leash on it. He has to have the account details here. My eyes locked onto the large oil painting of the Chicago skyline hanging behind his mahogany desk. I had always hated that painting. Thomas had insisted on hanging it himself when we moved in, claiming it was a structural necessity to anchor it directly into the studs. He had lied. I stood up, grabbed the heavy brass letter opener from his desk, and wedged it behind the heavy wooden frame. I pried it forward, the drywall crumbling slightly, until the painting swung outward on a concealed hinge. Behind it sat a steel wall safe, its digital keypad blinking a faint, mocking red. "Megan, I found a safe. Hang on." I put the phone on speaker and rested it on the desk. My fingers hovered over the keypad. If he used Sylvia's birthday for his iPad, what would he use for the financial vault that held their future? I typed in Chloe's birthday. Error. I typed in his own birthday. Error. I paused, closing my eyes, thinking about the level of arrogance I was dealing with. Thomas and Sylvia had been divorced exactly 4 years ago. The day their divorce was finalized was the day he technically became a free man, the day this entire twisted game began. I typed in the date of their divorce decree, 1102, November 2nd. The keypad beeped a melodic green, and the heavy steel door clicked open. "I'm in," I whispered, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I reached inside and pulled out a stack of thick manila folders. The top one was labeled Apex Holdings Group, LLC. I spread the documents across the leather surface of the desk, flipping through the pages of legalese. It was an operating agreement. Arthur was listed as the managing director, but as I flipped to the final signature page, the air left my lungs in a sharp hiss. There, right beneath Arthur's signature, was mine. Thomas had forged my signature to list me as a silent guarantor. He needed my excellent credit score to secure the massive commercial line of credit attached to the LLC, but in his arrogance, he had made a fatal error. By legally binding me to the company, he had inadvertently given me full authorization to access and manage the accounts. "Megan," I breathed. "My name is on the LLC. He forged my signature to get a credit line. Are you serious?" Megan let out a dark, triumphant laugh. "Clara, if you are a guarantor on that account, you have legal right to access those funds. Does he have a banking authenticator? A token?" I yanked open the bottom drawer of his desk. Sitting right next to a stack of business cards was his black YubiKey, the physical USB security token he needed to access his high-tier commercial bank accounts. Because he had only packed a duffel bag to play Santa Claus at Sylvia's house, he had left his primary security key behind. I booted up his desktop iMac. Because his iPad was already unlocked and connected to the same Apple ID, I simply authorized the desktop login via the tablet. I navigated to his commercial banking portal, plugged the security token into the USB port, and pressed the glowing gold button. The screen loaded, revealing the dashboard for Apex Holdings Group. Available balance, $385,000. He hadn't just taken the home equity, he had been siphoning his partnership draws and our joint savings into this account for over a year. I stared at the number, feeling a sick mixture of betrayal and immense power. "I see the money, Megan. All of it. Drain it," she commanded. "Because it's a commercial account and you are a signed guarantor, you can initiate a wire transfer. Wire it directly into your private, single-signer account. The banks are closed, but the internal ledger will lock those funds in transit. By the time he realizes what happened on Monday, the money will be secured in an account he cannot touch, and we will immediately file an emergency injunction for fraud based on the forged signature." I didn't hesitate. I opened a new browser tab and logged into the mortgage portal for our Evanston home. The outstanding balance was $210,000. I initiated a direct, immediate payoff using the routing numbers from the LLC, effectively clearing the debt on the house he planned to saddle me with. Then, I wired the remaining $175,000 directly into a private, high-yield savings account I had opened before we were married, an account Thomas didn't even know existed. The screen flashed a green checkmark. Transfers pending. Funds locked. I exhaled a long, shaky breath, leaning back in his expensive leather chair. It was 8:45 p.m. The financial bleeding had been stopped, reversed, and sealed. But as I looked at the dark, snowy street outside the window, I realized saving myself wasn't enough. Thomas had tried to destroy my life so he could build a new one on my ruins. I wasn't just going to take my money back. I was going to burn his entire kingdom to the ground. The house was completely silent, save for the crackling of the fire I had deliberately kept roaring in the living room. At 9:30 p.m., I received a text from my mother. Their flight had been grounded in Denver due to the storm. They wouldn't be arriving until the morning of the 26th. It was a twist of fate that played perfectly into my hands. I needed this house empty for the finale. With the financial assets secured, I turned my attention back to the unlocked iPad. Thomas was a senior partner at Vanguard Associates, one of the most prestigious commercial architecture firms in the Midwest. His reputation was his currency. He prided himself on his ethics, his charm, and his untouchable status among the firm's elite clients. I opened his email app and began digging through his sent folder, filtering by attachments. It didn't take long to find the rot. Thomas had been managing a massive, multi-million-dollar corporate park development in downtown Chicago. As I cross-referenced the material invoices sent to the firm's accounting department with text messages he had sent to Sylvia, a sickening pattern emerged. Sylvia, did the Italian marble for the kitchen island arrive? The contractors are waiting. Thomas, yes, it's being delivered tomorrow. Don't worry about the cost. I buried the invoice under the lobby renovations for the corporate park project. Richard and William won't notice a thing. He hadn't just been stealing from me. He had been embezzling tens of thousands of dollars in high-end materials and contractor labor from his own firm, billing them to his largest client to fund Sylvia's lavish home renovations. This wasn't just unethical, it was a felony. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I took high-resolution screenshots of the text messages, downloaded the fraudulent invoices, and compiled everything into a single, devastating PDF document. I opened a new email draft, addressing it directly to Richard and William, the two founding partners of Vanguard Associates. Subject: Urgent internal audit required. Fraudulent billing on corporate park project. I kept the email brief, clinical, and completely devoid of emotion. I attached the PDF, clearly outlining how their star partner was using their most lucrative client as a personal piggy bank to fund his ex-wife's remodel. I didn't send it immediately. Instead, I used the scheduling feature, setting the email to automatically deploy at exactly 11:59 p.m. The trap was fully set. I closed the iPad, wiped my fingerprints off the screen, and placed it back in the desk drawer exactly as I had found it. I closed the safe, swung the heavy oil painting back into place, and walked out of the office, turning off the light behind me. At 11:30 p.m., I poured myself a fresh glass of Cabernet and sat in the wingback chair next to the Christmas tree. The gold and silver ornaments glittered in the firelight. I smoothed my black cashmere sweater, crossed my legs, and waited. 15 minutes later, the sweep of headlights washed across the living room walls. The crunch of tires on packed snow signaled his arrival. I took a slow sip of my wine, my pulse remarkably steady. The front door opened with a heavy creak. Thomas stepped inside, stomping the snow off his designer boots. He dropped his black leather duffel bag onto the hardwood floor with a dramatic, weary thud. He let out a long, theatrical sigh, shaking his head as he unbuttoned his wool coat. He walked into the living room, stopping when he saw me sitting by the fire. He immediately arranged his features into a mask of pure exhaustion, rubbing his temples as if he had just survived a war zone. "Clara, thank God," he breathed, walking over to kiss my forehead. I tilted my head just enough so his lips grazed my hair. What a nightmare. It took hours, but I finally got Chloe to calm down and go to sleep. Sylvia was an absolute wreck. "I'm so sorry I missed your parents' arrival. Where are they?" "Their flight was grounded," I said, my voice perfectly level. "They aren't coming until the 26th. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, feigning sympathy as he collapsed onto the sofa opposite me. "I'm so sorry. What a ruined Christmas Eve. But we have each other, right? I just need a drink. It was so incredibly stressful over there." I stared at him. I pictured the matching red plaid pajamas. I pictured the velvet box, the diamond pendant, the passionate kiss in the window. "Was it stressful, Thomas?" I asked quietly, swirling the dark red wine in my glass. "Or was it celebratory?" Because from where I was standing in the snow outside Sylvia's bay window at 5 o'clock, you looked incredibly relaxed for a man dealing with a psychiatric emergency. Thomas froze. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, ashen gray. His hand, which had been reaching for a throw pillow, stopped midair. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his charming facade cracking like thin ice. You were at Sylvia's? I brought a gift for Chloe, I replied, leaning forward slightly. But she seemed perfectly fine. Thrilled, actually, with her matching pajamas. And Sylvia seemed very happy with the diamond necklace you bought with the money you stole from our home equity. He stood up so fast the coffee table violently rattled. Clara, listen to me. You are misunderstanding what you saw. It's complicated. Sylvia needs to feel secure so she doesn't poison Chloe against me. I had to play along. I had to. Save it, Thomas, I interrupted, my voice slicing through his pathetic lies like a scalpel. I know about Arthur's LLC. I know about the paperwork you plan to file on January 2nd. His eyes widened in sheer panic. He took a step backward. How could you possibly know about that? I know a lot of things, I said, glancing at the antique clock on the mantel. It was 11:58 p.m. For instance, I know that your physical security token was left in your desk drawer. I also know that because you forged my signature on the Apex Holdings operating agreement, I am legally authorized to execute wire transfers. Thomas gasped, his hands flying to his head. What did you do? Clara, what the hell did you do? I paid off the mortgage on this house, I stated, a cold smile finally touching my lips. And I moved the remaining $175,000 into a private account. The bank internal ledger has already locked the funds. Your shadow account is completely empty. Are you insane? He screamed, his polished demeanor entirely destroyed, replaced by feral rage. That is my money. You have no right. I'll have you arrested for theft. I will destroy you. You can try, I whispered. The clock on the mantel began to chime. Dong. But I think you're going to be a little too busy defending yourself to worry about me. Dong. What does that mean? He demanded, his chest heaving. Dong. It means I also read the emails on your iPad, Thomas, I said, standing up to meet his gaze, the ones detailing the imported Italian marble and the contractor labor for Sylvia's kitchen. Dong. He stopped breathing. Utter, paralyzing terror washed over his eyes. I know you build those materials to the downtown corporate park project, I continued, my voice ringing clear over the chimes. And as of exactly 30 seconds ago, Richard and William know it too. He stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck, his knees hitting the edge of the sofa before he collapsed onto it. He buried his face in his hands, a guttural sound of pure defeat escaping his throat. It was midnight. Christmas had officially arrived, and just as I had promised myself, Thomas sat in the ruins of his own, making a man who had just lost his fortune, his family, and his future. The silence that followed the final chime of the grandfather clock was heavier than the winter snow outside. Thomas remained completely motionless on the sofa, his face buried in his hands, his breath coming in jagged, ragged gasps. I watched the man I had loved, the polished, charismatic architect who thought he was the smartest person in any room, crumble into a pathetic, trembling shell. Suddenly, he bolted upright. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and frantic. I can fix this, he muttered to himself, his hands shaking violently as he dug into his coat pockets for his cell phone. I can call Richard. I can explain. It was a clerical error, a misallocation of project funds. I'll just tell him I'm moving the money back on Monday. You can't move money you don't have, Thomas, I reminded him, my voice colder than the ice forming on the window panes. The Apex Holdings account at Chase Bank is at zero. You have nothing to transfer back. And I made sure to include the receipts for the Italian marble and the custom cabinetry that were delivered directly to Sylvia's address in Oak Park. It's not a clerical error when the stolen goods are installed in your ex-wife's kitchen. He dialed Richard's number anyway, pacing the length of the living room like a trapped animal. I could hear it ringing in the quiet room. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Then, the harsh, automated voice of the voicemail system clicked on. Thomas cursed, throwing the phone onto the plush rug. You bitch, he snarled, taking a menacing step toward me. His veneer of civilized charm was completely gone, replaced by a raw, ugly venom. You think you've won? You think you can just steal my money and ruin my career? I'll drag you through the Cook County courts for the next decade. I'll make sure you leave this marriage with absolutely nothing. I didn't flinch. I reached into the pocket of my cashmere sweater and pulled out my phone, tapping the screen to reveal an active call interface. The call had been connected for the last 10 minutes. Did you get all of that, Officer Davis? I asked calmly into the speaker. Loud and clear, Mrs. Miller. A deep, authoritative voice crackled back through the phone. We have a patrol car turning onto your street right now. We'll be there in 30 seconds. Thomas stopped dead in his tracks, the color draining from his face yet again. I told you I knew a lot of things, Thomas, I said, standing up and smoothing my sweater. I knew that cornering a narcissist who just lost everything is a dangerous game. I called the Evanston Police Department non-emergency line before you walked through that door. I told them I was terrified my husband might become violent when I confronted him about his infidelity. I requested a standby presence. Red and blue lights suddenly began flashing through the front bay window, casting eerie, colorful shadows across the beautiful balsam fir we had decorated together just days ago. Pack your duffel bag, I commanded, pointing toward the door. Because if you are still standing in my living room when those officers knock on the door, I will press charges for the threats you just made on a recorded line. You are leaving this house, and you are never coming back. He looked from me to the flashing lights outside, realizing he was completely trapped. Without another word, he snatched his leather bag from the floor, threw on his coat, and bolted out the front door into the freezing night. I watched from the window as the police officers intercepted him on the driveway, questioning him briefly, before ensuring he got into his Audi and drove away into the storm. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in swift, merciless justice. On Christmas morning, while Thomas was presumably shivering in a guest bedroom at Sylvia's house, Megan filed the emergency injunction against him and his brother Arthur for the forged signature on the Apex Holdings LLC. By the time the banks reopened on the 26th, the remaining funds were fully protected by a court order. My parents arrived safely from Denver, and instead of a traditional holiday dinner, we celebrated the securing of my financial freedom. But the real explosion happened at Vanguard Associates. Richard and William did not take kindly to being used as a shield for corporate embezzlement. They launched a full internal audit the moment they read my email. By noon on December 26th, Thomas was officially terminated. But they didn't stop there. Because the theft exceeded $100,000, the firm filed a formal police report with the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Division. Thomas was arrested at Sylvia's house in Oak Park 3 days later. And Sylvia? The moment the money dried up and the police showed up at her door with a warrant to inspect the stolen materials in her kitchen, she threw Thomas to the wolves. She claimed she had no idea the renovations were funded by stolen money and filed a restraining order against him to protect her own assets. But it didn't save her. I had already forwarded the iCloud text messages to the IRS and the authorities, proving she was fully aware of the fraud. Her house was seized as part of the restitution settlement. Arthur, Thomas's brother, was indicted for his role in managing the fraudulent shell company and lost his license to practice business law in Illinois. As for me, I sold the Evanston house for a massive profit just 2 months later. Because the mortgage had been paid off with the LLC funds, the entirety of the sale went straight into my pocket legally and cleanly, as awarded by the divorce judge, who was utterly disgusted by Thomas's conduct. I packed up my life, left the brutal Chicago winters behind, and moved to a beautiful coastal property in California. Thomas tried to outsmart everyone. He tried to play the devoted father, the generous ex-husband, and the cunning businessman, all while treating me like a naive pawn. But he forgot the golden rule of playing games in the dark. Eventually, someone is going to turn on the lights. What an absolute masterpiece of revenge. Clara didn't just survive. She strategically dismantled every single piece of Thomas's treacherous double life. If you loved watching this cheating husband get exactly what he deserved, hit that like button right now. Share this story with anyone who loves a brilliant, calculating comeback, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more jaw-dropping, real-life drama stories every single week. What would you have done in Clara's shoes? Let me know in the comments below.